It was a week before Christmas, and the mall was buzzing with excitement. Shoppers rushed from store to store, carrying bags filled with gifts and decorations. Christmas music played softly in the background, blending with the chatter of busy crowds. Outside, the crisp winter air bit at anyone who stepped out, but inside the mall, the warmth from the Christmas lights and decorated trees made it feel like a holiday wonderland. Among the crowd walked the Anderson family. They were dressed in the finest clothes money could buy. Mr. Anderson, a wealthy businessman, held his wife's hand, while Martha, his wife, scrolled through her phone, oblivious to the people around them. Their son, Jeremy, skipped excitedly beside them, his eyes wide with wonder at the dazzling lights and displays. They were a family of privilege, living a life few could imagine. They had wealth, influence, and the finest things in life. But there was one thing they didn't have: respect for people who weren't like them. For the Andersons, Christmas was just another reason to buy more things. It wasn't a time for family or giving back. It was simply another opportunity to shop, eat, and enjoy the luxuries their money provided. They didn't think twice about the people they passed by. The workers, the poor, the people who weren't part of their world. To them, those people were invisible. Across the street, in the shadows of the mall, a man stood at the bus stop. His name was Marcus. He wore a coat that had seen better days, and his shoes were worn down from years of hard work. He was a poor black man, and his life was far from easy. He had just finished a long day working at a construction site, his hands calloused from hard labor. The cold wind bit at his skin, but he didn't mind. He was used to it. He was on his way home, looking forward to a simple meal, when he noticed something strange. The Andersons walked right past him, but something about their son, Jeremy, caught Marcus's attention. The boy was laughing and playing, oblivious to the crowds around him. But Marcus's sharp eyes noticed something else: a man who was watching Jeremy from the shadows. The kidnapper was tall, wearing a heavy coat and a cap pulled low over his face. He was scanning the crowd, looking for the perfect moment to strike. And then, just as Marcus had feared, the man moved. Without warning, he grabbed Jeremy by the arm, pulling him roughly into the crowd. Jeremy screamed, but the noise of the busy mall drowned out his cries. The man tried to drag him away toward the back of the building, away from the watchful eyes of the bustling shoppers. Marcus's heart raced. Without thinking, he bolted into action. His feet pounded against the pavement as he ran toward the scene. He didn't know if he would be able to stop the kidnapper, but he couldn't just stand by. He had to try. The man hadn't noticed Marcus yet, and by the time he grabbed hold of Jeremy and started to drag him into the alley, Marcus was almost there. With one powerful leap, Marcus tackled the kidnapper to the ground, slamming him onto the cold concrete. The man was caught off guard, falling backward, but quickly scrambled to get up. Jeremy was terrified, his eyes wide with fear, but he was safer now. The kidnapper struggled beneath Marcus, trying to push him off, but Marcus held on tight. His years of hard work and survival in the rough streets gave him strength, and he wasn't going to let this man get away with taking Jeremy. The struggle seemed to last forever. Marcus pinned the kidnapper down, using all his energy to keep him under control. Jeremy stood nearby, trembling but too afraid to move. Marcus shouted for help, hoping someone would hear him. Minutes later, security rushed to the scene. The kidnapper was still struggling, but he had been completely overpowered. Mall guards quickly restrained him, and police were called to arrest him. The chaos finally started to settle, and the crowd around them began to disperse. Meanwhile, inside the store, the Anderson family had continued their shopping, unaware of the danger their son had just faced. When they finally emerged, they saw Jeremy standing safely beside the stranger, Marcus. He was still holding the kidnapper down, waiting for the authorities to take over. At first, the Andersons didn't understand what had happened. They saw their son safe and sound, but they also saw a black man standing near him. Their instincts kicked in, not with gratitude, but with suspicion. Their eyes narrowed, and their expressions grew cold. The sight of Marcus, dressed in ragged clothes. Standing near their child made them uneasy. They had no idea that he was the hero who had saved their son's life. Before anyone could say anything, police arrived on the scene. The Andersons, still reeling from the shock of the situation, gave their statements. They didn't thank Marcus for his quick thinking or for saving Jeremy's life. Instead, they looked at him as if he was the problem, not the solution. "We don't know him," Mr. Anderson said, his voice tight with tension. "He was too close to our son. He could have been in on it." The police, not questioning the Andersons' words, quickly arrested Marcus. They treated him like a criminal, despite the fact that he had been the one to save Jeremy. Marcus didn't argue. He knew all too well how people like the Andersons viewed someone like him. They didn't see a hero in him. They only saw a black man who didn't belong in their world. As Marcus was taken away in handcuffs, the Andersons didn't even stop to ask what had really happened. They didn't thank him for saving their son's life. They didn't even look at him. They simply walked away, their thoughts clouded by their own prejudices. But the story didn't end there. The Andersons had no idea what was coming next. Their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't imagine. Jeremy, still shaken by what had happened, would soon wake up to tell them a truth that would shatter everything they believed about Marcus and about themselves. Days passed, and the Anderson family tried to go on with their lives, but they couldn't shake the events of that day. They went through the motions of Christmas shopping, holiday dinners, and office parties, but something didn't feel right. The sight of Marcus, the man who had saved their son, haunted Mr. Anderson. He kept replaying the moment in his head. How quickly they had judged him, how they had turned their backs on the person who had risked his life to save Jeremy. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in jail, his hands still shackled. The police had treated him like a criminal, and he couldn't understand why. He had done nothing but help, yet here he was locked away. He had seen this happen before. People like him, people who were poor and black, were often seen as threats, even when they were the ones trying to do good. But that didn't make it easier to accept. He felt betrayed, not just by the police, but by the Andersons, who had assumed the worst about him. The days dragged on, and Jeremy continued to recover from the shock. The blow to his head had left him unconscious for a while. But now he was awake, still weak but able to speak. His parents hovered over him, showering him with care, but they couldn't help but feel guilty. They knew something was wrong. They had never properly thanked the man who had saved their son, and now, as Christmas drew closer, they couldn't stop thinking about it. Then one morning, everything changed. Jeremy woke up in his hospital bed, his eyes groggy but full of life. The first thing he said startled his parents, making their hearts stop for a second. "The man who saved me," Jeremy whispered. "He was black. He stopped the bad man from taking me." Mr. and Mrs. Anderson froze. Their minds couldn't process what Jeremy had just said. They hadn't even thought about who the man was, only that he was near their son. But now, hearing their own son describe the man who had saved him in such simple terms, something clicked. Jeremy wasn't talking about a criminal. He was talking about a hero. The truth hit them hard. The man they had arrested, the man they had looked down on, wasn't a criminal at all. He had been their son's savior. Guilt washed over Mr. Anderson like a tidal wave. How could they have been so blind? How could they have treated Marcus like that? They hadn't even bothered to ask him what had really happened. They had been so quick to judge based on the color of his skin and the way he looked. Mrs. Anderson, her face pale, turned to her husband. "We made a terrible mistake, didn't we?" she asked quietly. "We didn't even thank him. We arrested him like he was the bad guy." Mr. Anderson didn't have an answer. He knew they had failed. They had failed to see the truth, failed to appreciate the man who had given everything to protect their son. All they could do now was try to fix it. The realization weighed heavily on them. Mr. Anderson knew he had to make things right. He had to go to the police station and find Marcus. He couldn't live with the shame of what they had done to him. With his heart pounding, Mr. Anderson drove to the police station that afternoon, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He had no idea how Marcus would react or if he would even want to hear his apology. All he knew was that he had to try. When he arrived, he walked into the station and asked for Marcus. The officer behind the desk gave him a strange look, but led him to a holding cell, where Marcus sat waiting. His eyes met Mr. Anderson's as the door opened. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. Marcus didn't know what to expect. He had no reason to believe that the man who had treated him like a criminal would now show any kindness. "I was wrong," Mr. Anderson said, his voice shaking. "I should never have treated you the way I did. You saved my son's life, and I treated you like a threat. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." Marcus's expression remained calm, but there was something in his eyes that spoke volumes. He had seen this kind of apology before, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. People apologized when it was convenient, when they realized they had been wrong, but the pain of being judged and misunderstood didn't go away so easily. "I know you're sorry," Marcus said, his voice steady, "but it doesn't change what happened. You looked at me and saw nothing but my skin. You didn't see the man who saved your son, and that hurts." Mr. Anderson's heart sank. The truth of what Marcus said hit him hard. He didn't know how to fix it, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave it like this. "I want to make it right," Mr. Anderson said, almost pleading. "This Christmas, I want you to come to our home. We want to celebrate together. We want to show you that we see you as a person, not just someone we've judged." Marcus looked at him for a long time, his face unreadable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "I'll come," Marcus said, "but only if you mean it. Only if you truly understand what I've been through." Mr. Anderson nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He wasn't sure what Christmas would bring, but one thing was certain. It wouldn't be the same as any other Christmas before. When Marcus arrived at the Andersons' house on Christmas Eve, something felt different. The Andersons were nervous, unsure of what to expect. They had prepared a meal, decorated their house, and bought gifts, but none of that mattered. What mattered was whether they could truly change their ways and learn to treat Marcus, and others like him, with the respect they deserved. As the evening went on, something remarkable happened. The tension slowly eased. There were awkward silences at first, but slowly, they began to talk. Marcus shared stories about his life, about the struggles he had faced, and about the moments that had shaped him into the man he was. The Andersons listened, and as they listened, something shifted within them. They began to understand. They began to see the man, not just the color of his skin. By the end of the night, something incredible had happened. The Andersons had learned that true wealth wasn't in money or status, but in love, kindness, and understanding. And as they sat together, eating dinner and laughing, they realized that this Christmas would forever be the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. It was a Christmas they would never forget, a Christmas where they learned the true meaning of respect, kindness, and family. And the greatest gift they received wasn't under the tree. It was the understanding that people can change, that it's never too late to do the right thing,